On Christmas Eve, 15 guests sat around the dining table in the mansion I had built over 30 years. Then my daughter-in-law stood up, placed a can of discounted dog food and a bowl of bones in front of me and smiled. "You've lived off this family long enough," she said. "This is all you deserve." The room fell silent. I looked at my son. He lowered his eyes and said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't leave in anger. Because after 6 years of waiting, they had finally given me the answer I needed. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. It genuinely means the world to me. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? Your city, your country, I read every single one. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and reflection. Any similarity to names or places is purely coincidental, but everything it teaches you, I believe, is worth carrying. My daughter-in-law has many talents. She can walk into a room and make every woman in it feel underdressed. She can laugh at the exact right moment, the kind of laugh that sounds like wind chimes and means absolutely nothing. She can set a dinner table so beautifully it belongs in a magazine, the crystal glasses catching candlelight, just so the centerpiece of white poinsettias and pine, the smell of roasted rosemary hanging in the air like a promise. What she cannot do and has never been able to do is hide what she really thinks of me. My name is Elias Wren. I am 68 years old, and on the night of December 24th, 2025, in the dining room of a Greenwich mansion, I built with my own hands. Over 30 years, my daughter-in-law set a bowl of bones and a dog food can with a discount sticker in front of me and called me the shame of the family. I want to tell you exactly how it happened, because the way it happened matters. There were 15 guests at that table. Neighbors from the Riverside Drive side of town, 2 couples from Sutton's golf club, a woman named Sandra, who chaired some charity board Brielle had recently joined. These were not my people. They were Brielle's audience, and she had arranged them the way a director arranges a stage. I had been seated at the far end of the table, not the head. The far end, near the kitchen, where the light from the chandelier barely reached. 6 years I had lived in that house, 6 years eating at that table, and she had moved my chair further down every season. I had noticed. I had said nothing. The dinner was going the way Brielle's dinners always went: smooth, controlled, performative. She had just finished telling the table a story about a charity auction she'd attended in the Hamptons. Sandra was laughing. The man from the golf club was nodding. Sutton, my son, was sitting 4 seats to my left, cutting his meat with the focused attention of a man who has learned that looking busy is the safest thing to do at his wife's dinner parties. Then Brielle stood up. She walked into the kitchen, and she came back carrying 2 things. The first was one of my late wife's ceramic serving bowls, the one Eleanor used for Thanksgiving stuffing every year for 22 years before she passed. I had not seen that bowl since Brielle reorganized the kitchen cabinets 2 years ago and told me she had put the old things away. The second was a can of dog food, store brand. A yellow clearance sticker marked 30% off was still stuck to the lid. She set both in front of me. Not placed. Set. The kind of deliberate motion that says, "Watch this." "This," she said loudly enough for the entire table to hear, "is what you get." She smiled. Not at me. At the room. "You've been a burden on this family long enough, Elias. You want to sit at our table and eat our food, fine. But let's be honest about what you are. You're a freeloader. You've been one for 6 years. And frankly," she gestured at the bowl and the can, "this is still more than you've earned." The table went dead quiet. I heard Sandra's fork touch her plate. Heard one of the golf club wives draw a breath. Heard the soft crackle of the fireplace across the room, which had no idea what was happening and kept burning cheerfully, regardless. I looked at the bowl. Eleanor's bowl. The one that had held 22 years of Thanksgiving dinners. Then I looked at Sutton. He was staring at his plate. His jaw was tight, the muscle working along the side of his face the way it does when he is holding something back. But he did not look up. He did not say a word. That more than the bowl, more than the dog food, more than Brielle's smile, that was what I had been waiting 6 years to see. I picked up the dog food can. I read the label. I set it back down gently, as though it were something I intended to keep. Then I looked at Brielle, and I did something she clearly had not prepared for. I smiled. "Thank you, Brielle," I said. My voice came out steady, warm, even the voice I used 30 years ago when I was closing deals across conference tables with men twice my size. "I won't forget this meal." I stood up, folded my napkin beside my plate, and picked up my coat from the back of my chair. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said to the table. I walked through the dining room, through the foyer with its 15-foot Christmas tree, and its wrapped gifts, and its smell of pine and wealth, and I pushed open the front door. Behind me, I heard Brielle say something to the table, her voice recovering its brightness, the way a radio signal corrects after interference. Then I heard a few polite, uneasy laughs. And then I heard Sutton's voice, not saying my name, not standing up, not following, just laughing along. I walked to my car, my old Ford, the one I'd kept in the driveway for 6 years, to make a point about how little I had left. The leather seat was cold. The heater took 30 seconds to kick in. I sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel, the engine idling, looking at the yellow light spilling through the dining room windows. I did not feel humiliated. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Something that had been sitting in my chest like a stone for 6 years, cold and heavy and patient. It felt like certainty. Because what Brielle did not know, what Sutton did not know, what none of the 15 people sitting at that table with their crystal glasses and their sympathy laughter did not know, was that I had been waiting for exactly this. Not hoping for it, not fearing it, waiting for it. I put the car in reverse. 6 years I had given them. 6 years to show me who they were when they believed I had nothing left to give. Now I had my answer, and the clock had started. The Delamar Greenwich Harbor sits right on the water, the kind of place where old money goes to be quiet. I had driven there from the house in under 20 minutes, checked in under my middle name and my mother's maiden name, Elias Holt, paid cash for 2 nights, and made it to my room before the feeling in my hands fully returned. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark coat still on and looked out the window at the harbor. The water was black and still. A few boats rocked gently at their moorings. Somewhere across the cove, a string of Christmas lights blinked on and off with the mindless patience of things that don't know what's happening around them. I had not stayed in a hotel in 6 years. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be in a room that was entirely mine. Now I need to tell you something. Something I have not told anyone except one person, and I need you to understand it before anything else in this story makes sense. 6 years ago, I did not retire. I know that's what everyone believed. My doctor believed it. My neighbors believed it. The men I'd done business with for 3 decades believed it. And Sutton, my son, my only child, absolutely believed it. But I was not tired. I was not fading. I was not the old man eating cereal alone in the cottage who needed Brielle to remind him to take his medication. I was watching. Let me explain who I was before any of this happened, because context is everything. Wren and Legacy Capital Group. That's what I built. Not inherited, not partnered into built. Started with $40,000 I'd saved working construction in Hartford when I was 24 years old, a second-hand desk and a real estate license I'd studied for at night after 12-hour shifts. By the time I was 50, the firm managed a portfolio of commercial properties and private equity investments across Connecticut and New York worth just over $60 million. We had 11 full-time employees, 2 major institutional clients who had been with us for more than 15 years, and a name in this business that meant something. Elias, people used to say when they called, "You're the only one I trust with this." I had worked my entire life to be the kind of man that sentence was true about. And then Sutton married Brielle. I remember the first time she came to Sunday dinner at the house, still my house then, before I moved the fiction of ownership to Sutton's name. She had ordered flowers for the table without asking. $300 of white orchids that arrived before she did, with a card that read, "So happy to be part of the family." She was 28. She had eyes that were always slightly ahead of whatever she was saying, like she was already planning the next room she'd walk into. I noticed. I said nothing. Over the next 2 years I watched. I watched Sutton change, not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, but slowly, the way a photograph fades. He stopped finishing his own sentences around her. He started looking at hers before answering questions I'd asked him directly, checking for the approved response. He stopped calling me on Sunday afternoons the way he had since college. And I watched Brielle, who was patient and strategic and very, very good at making herself indispensable. "You should let Sutton take over more," she told me at a family dinner in the spring of what turned out to be my last year running things openly. "You've worked so hard, Elias. You deserve to rest." She called me Elias. Never Dad. Never anything warmer. Just Elias, delivered with a smile that said, "I see exactly what you are, and I am waiting you out." So I made a decision. 7 years before that Christmas dinner, I had sat down with the one person in the world I trusted completely, Constance Voss. We spent that first year building the trust structure in silence, laying every legal foundation before anyone else would see it. The following December, when Sutton signed the management agreement, the architecture was already complete and waiting. Who had been my attorney for 25 years, who had drafted every major contract the company had ever signed, who had seen the inside of my business the way a surgeon sees the inside of a body and still chose to keep working. I told her what I was thinking. She didn't blink. "You want to set up a trust," she said. "I want to set up a trust that nobody knows about," I said. "Not the structure, not the scope, not the fact that it exists. And you want to hand Sutton a management agreement and let him believe it's a deed. I want to see what he does with it," I said. "And I want to see what she does to him." Connie had looked at me for a long moment across her desk in Manhattan. "Elias," she said finally, "that is either the most patient thing I have ever heard or the saddest." "It might be both," I told her. She drafted the Wren family trust that summer. Every asset went inside it. I retained full control. No one else had authority over a single dollar. Sutton received a management agreement, 32 pages, single-spaced, the kind of document that lawyers bill by the hour to produce. He signed it at a dinner table right here in Greenwich, with a glass of champagne in his other hand, and Brielle beaming beside him. He never read it. Page 9, Clause 4.2 stated clearly that the agreement would terminate automatically on December 31st, 2025, unless renewed in writing by the grantor. 6 years, that was how long I had given them. I sat in that dark hotel room on Christmas Eve and thought about all of it every Sunday dinner, every time Brielle had introduced me to her friends as Sutton's father. He used to be in real estate. Every time I had smiled and said nothing, and driven back to the cottage and sat with my thoughts, and my patience and my absolute certainty that a man's true character only reveals itself when he believes there is nothing left to lose. And then I thought about Sutton's face at that dinner table, the tight jaw, the downcast eyes, the laugh that came after I walked out. My phone read 11:17 p.m. I found the name in my contacts and pressed call. It rang twice. "Connie," I said. Her voice was clear, awake, unhurried, the voice of a woman who had been expecting this call for a very long time. "Elias," she said. "How bad?" I thought about the bowl, about Eleanor's ceramic serving dish holding dog food on Christmas Eve. "Bad enough," I said. A pause. Then, "Are you ready?" I looked out at the harbor, at the black water, at the Christmas lights blinking on and off across the cove. "I've been ready for 6 years," I said. Connie Voss did not go home for Christmas. I found that out later that she had stayed in her Manhattan office on the 31st floor of a building on Lexington Avenue, files open on her desk, a cup of coffee gone cold beside her keyboard, just waiting. She told me she had a feeling about this year, that something in the way I had sounded the last few times we spoke told her December was going to be the month. So when I called at 11:17 on Christmas Eve, she picked up on the second ring. "Elias," she said. "How bad?" I leaned back against the headboard of that hotel bed, still in my coat, and I told her everything. The bowl. Eleanor's ceramic dish. The dog food can with the clearance sticker. Brielle's voice carrying across that table like she was making a toast. Sutton's eyes fixed on his plate. When I finished, Connie was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "I know, because I counted the way you count when you're waiting for a doctor to speak after reading your results." She did it in front of 15 people, Connie said. It wasn't a question. 15, I confirmed. I heard her exhale, not dramatically, not with shock, just the long, slow breath of a woman who had been practicing law for 30 years and had stopped being surprised by human behavior somewhere around year 12. "Elias," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Are you doing this because of tonight? Because of the bowl and what she said? Because if you are, I need you to sit with it until morning and call me back." I almost smiled at that. 25 years she had known me, and she still asked, "Connie." I said, "I'm doing this because of 6 years. Tonight was just the answer to the question." Another pause. Then her voice shifted, not warmer but more precise, the way a surgeon's hands steady right before the first incision. "All right," she said. "Then let me tell you where we stand." She explained it the way she always explained things, without preamble, without cushion, straight through the center of the matter. The Wren Family Trust had been established 7 years ago. Every asset held by Wren and Legacy Capital Group, the commercial properties in Greenwich and Stamford, the investment portfolios, the client contracts, the firm's operating accounts had been placed inside it. I was the grantor, meaning I was the one who created and funded it. I was also the sole beneficiary, meaning I was the only person legally entitled to benefit from those assets, and I retained full authority as the controlling trustee. Now I want to make sure you understand what that means, because this is the part that Sutton never understood, partly because he never asked, and partly because he never read what he signed. A trust is not a transfer of ownership. It is a legal structure that holds assets on behalf of a beneficiary. When Sutton signed the management agreement 6 years ago, he received the authority to run the company day to day, to sign contracts, manage employees, make operational decisions. But he did not receive ownership of a single share. Not $1 of those assets ever legally belonged to him. "He signed a management agreement," Connie said. "Not a deed, not a share transfer. 32 pages of operational authority that he has been exercising for 6 years on the assumption that it was the same thing as ownership." "And it's not," I said. "It is absolutely not," she said. "And here is the part that matters most right now. That agreement expires on December 31st. That is 7 days from tonight." I let that land. 7 days. Sutton had 7 days left of the only authority he had ever actually possessed, and he had spent them sitting at a dinner table saying nothing, while his wife called his father a freeloader. "The termination clause," I said. "Page 9, clause 4.2, Connie said, and I could hear the faint sound of paper turning, which meant she had the actual document open on her desk. "The agreement terminates automatically on its expiration date, unless renewed in writing by the grantor. That's you, Elias. You are the only person who can renew it, and you haven't." "And I won't," I said. "No," she said. And there was something in her voice then, not satisfaction exactly, but the recognition of a long-anticipated outcome finally arriving. "You won't." We talked for nearly 2 hours after that. I won't give you every detail of what was decided on that call, because some of it was legal strategy that belongs to those quiet hours between midnight and morning when decisions get made that the daylight later has to live with. What I will tell you is this: by the time I set the phone down at 2:14 in the morning, the first pieces were already in motion. Connie had been preparing for this for months. The documents were drafted, the notifications were ready, the sequence was mapped out step by step. "One more thing," Connie said just before we hung up. "Harlow sent me his quarterly report last week. There are some transactions you need to look at." Harlow Briggs had been my chief financial officer for 15 years, a quiet, methodical man from Darien who kept his desk immaculate and his observations to himself until he had something worth saying. He knew the truth about the trust. He was one of 2 people in the world who did. For the past 14 months, he had been sending me weekly summaries of every unusual financial movement inside the company, flagged and documented one line at a time. "He emailed the full file tonight," Connie said. "Read it in the morning, Elias. Get some sleep first." "Connie," I said. "I know," she said. I set the phone down and sat in the dark for a while longer. Outside, the harbor was absolutely still. Somewhere across town, in a house that had never actually belonged to them, Sutton and Brielle were asleep, warm and certain, and completely unaware that the ground beneath them had already begun to shift. They had 7 days. They didn't know it yet. Christmas morning came in gray and cold off the water, the kind of December light that has no warmth in it, just pale, flat brightness that makes everything look a little more honest than it did the night before. I ordered coffee and scrambled eggs at the hotel restaurant, took a table by the window, and opened my laptop. Harlow's email had arrived at 6:47 a.m. The subject line read, "Q4 Summary Final." I had been receiving variations of this email every week for 14 months, each one a little longer than the last, each one building on the one before it. The way a case file builds one fact at a time, one transaction at a time, until the picture is undeniable. This one was 41 pages. I poured my coffee and started reading. Now let me tell you who Harlow Briggs is, because he matters to this story more than most people will ever know. Harlow had come to work for me 15 years ago, fresh out of a decade at a mid-size accounting firm in Stamford, where he had developed a reputation for finding discrepancies that other people missed. Not because he was suspicious by nature, Harlow was one of the least dramatic people I had ever met, but because he was meticulous in the way that certain quiet people are meticulous completely, almost obsessively, without ego. When I set up the trust, I told Harlow the truth. All of it. I needed one person inside the company who understood the real structure, who could monitor the financials from the inside and report directly to me without Sutton knowing. Harlow had listened to the whole explanation without interrupting, and when I finished, he said, "What do you need me to watch for?" That was Harlow. No drama. Just what do you need? What he had found over the past 14 months was this: 3 commercial properties held by Wren and Legacy, a retail complex in Stamford, an office building in Westport, and a warehouse facility in Norwalk had been quietly transferred to an LLC called Meridian Bridge Holdings. The transfers had been executed through a series of internal memos and legal filings that on the surface looked like routine asset restructuring, the kind of paperwork that a busy CFO might glance at and sign off on without scrutinizing every line. Except Harlow scrutinized every line. Meridian Bridge Holdings had been registered in Delaware, chosen specifically because Delaware requires minimal public disclosure 8 months before the first transfer. The registered agent was a law firm in Bridgeport. The sole member of the LLC, as listed in the operating agreement, was a man named Douglas Fenn. Douglas Fenn was Brielle's brother. The transfer prices were 40% below current market valuation. 3 properties worth a combined estimated value of $11 million had been moved out of the trust's holdings for just under $6.5 million, a discount of roughly $4.5 million paid to an LLC controlled by Brielle's own family. I set my fork down. My eggs had gone cold without my noticing. I kept reading. Page 22 of Harlow's report contained something I had not expected: a screenshot of an internal email thread. Sutton's company address on one end, Brielle's personal email on the other. The exchange was dated November 3rd, 2025, 7 weeks before Christmas. Brielle's message was 3 lines. The Norwalk transfer is stalled. Fen is nervous about the timeline. We need it done before year-end. Sutton's reply was 1 line: just make sure it's done before the end of the year. I read that line 3 times. My son, who had sat at that dinner table on Christmas Eve and said nothing, done nothing, laughed when his wife laughed after I walked out the door. My son had known. He had not stumbled into this. He had not been manipulated without understanding. He had read that message, understood exactly what it referred to, and told his wife to get it done. I closed the laptop. I sat there for a moment with both hands flat on the table, the way you sit when you need to feel something solid beneath you. The restaurant around me was doing what hotel restaurants do on Christmas morning: staff moving quietly, a family with 2 young kids at the table near the fireplace. The father pouring syrup on pancakes, while his daughter explained something urgent about her new stuffed animal. Normal. Just a normal Christmas morning. Except for the 41 pages on my screen. I paid the check, got my coat, and walked to my car. I drove the 20 minutes to a parking area 2 blocks from the house on Meadow Ridge Drive and pulled in. Left the engine running for the heat. From where I sat, I could see the breakfast room windows, the ones that looked out over the back lawn, the ones Brielle had put plantation shutters on 2 years ago because she didn't like the way the neighbors could see in. The shutters were open. I could see the 2 of them at the breakfast table. Sutton in a gray sweater, Brielle in whatever she wore when she was at home and performing ease. A coffee pot between them. The chandelier on even though it was morning. She had always kept the lights bright in that house. I called Harlow. He picked up on the first ring. Mr. Wren? Good morning, Harlow. Did you sleep? A few hours, he said. I wanted to make sure the file sent cleanly. It did, I said. I read it. A beat. Then all of it. All of it, I said. Including the November 3rd exchange. I heard him exhale, not with relief, but with the particular weariness of someone who has been carrying a weight alone for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. I debated whether to include that, Harlow said. I wanted to be certain before I put it in writing. You were right to include it, I said. Harlow, I need you to be ready to move on the accounts the moment I give you the word. All access, all credentials, everything tied to Sutton and Brielle, frozen. I've had the execution checklist prepared for 6 weeks, Harlow said. I'm ready when you are, sir. I looked at the breakfast room window one more time. Brielle was laughing at something. Her head tilted back the way it did when she wanted the room to notice her laughing. Not yet, I said, but soon. I put the car in gear and drove back toward the harbor. Behind me, through the shutters she had chosen, because she liked her privacy, my daughter-in-law was having a very pleasant Christmas morning, completely certain that she had won something. She had not won anything. She had just handed me everything I needed. I have a particular kind of respect for people who show up early. Harlow Briggs was already at his desk in the Wren and Legacy offices on Greenwich Avenue since 5:45 that morning. 2 cups of coffee, already finished, the execution checklist open on his screen, waiting for 6 o'clock, the way a surgeon waits for the moment the anesthesia takes hold. I know this because he told me afterward. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At 6 o'clock sharp on the morning of December 26th, while the rest of Greenwich was sleeping off its Christmas ham, Harlow began. He called me first, a single ring, my cue that things were in motion. I was already dressed, sitting by the window of my hotel room, with my 3rd coffee of the morning, watching the harbor turn from black to gray in the early light. We're starting, Harlow said. Go ahead, I told him. Here is what it means in practical terms to revoke someone's access to a company they believe they own. Let me explain it clearly because the details matter. The accounts of Wren and Legacy Capital Group were held in the name of the Wren Family Trust. As controlling trustee, I had the legal authority to modify or revoke the signing privileges of any authorized party at any time, including the party currently operating as CEO under a management agreement. Harlow, acting on my written instruction, delivered the night before, contacted our primary bank at their commercial banking line the moment it opened, and submitted the revocation paperwork Connie had pre-prepared. By 6:15, Sutton Wren's name had been removed from the list of authorized signatories on every company account. By 6:30, the 2 corporate credit cards issued in Brielle's name, which she used for everything from interior decorating invoices to first-class flights, to wherever she went when she told Sutton she was visiting friends, were deactivated. By 6:45, Harlow sent me a 2-line text, all access revoked, awaiting next instruction. I set my phone face down on the nightstand and finished my coffee. The first message from Sutton came in at 7:32. A text, not a call, which told me he was still trying to hold himself together, still trying to treat this like a technical problem with a simple fix. "Dad, there's some kind of error with the accounts. Can you call the bank and sort it out?" Probably just a system glitch. A system glitch. That's what 6 years of watching and waiting looked like to him on a Thursday morning, a system glitch. I set the phone down without responding. By 8 o'clock, he had called me 4 times. Between the calls, Harlow was giving me updates in real time, short, precise messages, the way Harlow communicated everything. 7:41, Sutton called the office. Receptionist told him all account matters require authorization from Mr. Elias Wren. He asked her to repeat that twice. I could picture it. Sutton standing in the kitchen of that house, still in whatever he slept in, Brielle behind him with her arms crossed and her jaw set. The 2 of them staring at a phone that wasn't giving them the answers they expected. 7:58. Brielle attempted to use the corporate Amex at an online retailer. Card declined. She called the bank directly. Bank confirmed, card deactivated per trustee instruction. She asked to speak to a supervisor. I almost felt something close to amusement at that Brielle, who had walked through 6 years of that house like she owned every molecule of air in it, asking to speak to a supervisor about why her shopping cart had stopped working. 8:09, Sutton called the office again, asked specifically for Harlow. I told him I was unavailable. Smart. Sutton was starting to connect the pieces, starting to understand that this wasn't a glitch. It was a decision. And the decision had come from somewhere he hadn't expected. By the time the 8th call came in from Sutton's number at 8:23, my phone had lit up so many times the screen had barely gone dark between rings. I watched it vibrate against the nightstand. Sutton's name appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing, like a man knocking on a door he couldn't figure out how to open. I thought about that Christmas dinner table, about Eleanor's bowl, about the sound of my son's laughter drifting through the screen door after I walked out. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with the particular ache of a man who had loved his son without condition for 68 years and was now sitting in a hotel room watching that son call him 8 times because the money had stopped. Not because of the bowl, not because of Brielle, because of the money. I picked up on the 8th call. "Dad." Sutton's voice cracked at the edges, still controlled, but only barely the way a dam sounds right before it goes. "Dad, I don't know what is happening, but I need you to fix this right now. The accounts are locked. My credentials don't work anywhere. The office is telling me they need your authorization for everything." "Sutton," I said. "The bank said the trustee revoked our access, and I don't even know what that means. I thought you transferred." "Sutton." My voice was quiet, steady. The voice I used in boardrooms when I needed the room to stop talking and start listening. "I need you to find the management agreement you signed 6 years ago." A beat. "What?" "The agreement. The one from the dinner at the house, the one you signed in December of 2019. Find it. Read page 9. "Dad, what are you? This isn't about paperwork right now. We need to." "It is exactly about paperwork," I said. "It has always been about paperwork. Find it, Sutton, read it carefully, then call your lawyer." He started to say something else. I could hear Brielle's voice in the background, sharp and urgent, coaching him on what to say next. And I did something I had not done to my son in 68 years of knowing him. I hung up. I set the phone on the nightstand face up this time, and I watched the screen. It lit up once more, then went dark, then stayed dark. Outside, the harbor had turned fully light, now the kind of cold December brightness that has no opinion about anything. What Sutton didn't know, what I chose not to tell him on that call, because some things a man has to walk up to himself before he can understand them, was that the accounts were only the first move. There were others. Sutton called back 40 minutes later. I had moved from the window to the small desk in the corner of the room, where I had my laptop open and a pad of paper in front of me, old habit writing things down by hand when I needed to think clearly. I heard the phone ring, and I looked at the screen, and I saw his name, and something in my chest did something complicated that I cannot fully describe to you, except to say that it was not simple, and it was not clean, and it was not the feeling of a man who had won something. It was the feeling of a father who had raised a boy for 38 years and was now watching that boy on the other side of a wall that the boy had built himself, brick by brick, and did not yet fully understand. I picked up, "Dad." His voice was different this time. The controlled panic from the first call was gone, replaced by something harder, something I recognized the voice Sutton used when he had decided to stop asking and start pushing. "I found the agreement." "Good," I said. I read page 9. A pause where I could hear him breathing short, tight breaths, the kind that come when a man is trying very hard not to let you hear how scared he is. "Dad, this is a management agreement. This is not a transfer. This is not what you told me it was." "I never told you it was a transfer," I said. "I told you I was stepping back. I told you the company would be yours to run. Those are not the same thing. You let me believe." His voice broke slightly, then hardened again almost immediately, the way it does when someone is furious and ashamed at the same time. "For 6 years, Dad, you let me believe that company was mine. You let Brielle, you let us make decisions, make plans. You sat in that cottage and ate dinner at our table, and you never once said, 'I sat at your table,' I said, 'and your wife served me dog food on Christmas Eve.'" The line went so quiet, I could hear the faint ambient sound of whatever room he was standing, in his home office, I guessed, because I could hear the particular acoustic emptiness of a room with carpet and no other people in it. Brielle had been removed from this conversation, which told me Sutton had either sent her out or walked away from her, and I wasn't sure which one revealed more about where his head was. That was... He stopped, started again. "That was wrong. What she did was wrong, I know that." "Do you?" I asked. My voice was still even, but my hand tightened around the phone. Because from where I was standing, Sutton, what I saw was my son cutting his meat and laughing when she laughed. A sharp intake of breath. "I wasn't laughing at you. I heard you laugh," I said. "I was at the other end of that table. I heard it through the screen door. The silence that followed that was different from the others. This one had weight in it, the weight of something true that a person has just been handed and does not yet know what to do with." "Dad." His voice dropped, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a moment, I heard something underneath the hardness that sounded like the boy he used to be. The boy who used to call me on Sunday afternoons from his college dorm just to talk about nothing in particular. "Dad, I'm sorry about that. I am. But you have to understand, you cannot lock me out of that company and act like like I have no claim. Read the termination clause," I said. Page 9, clause 4.2. "The agreement expires December 31st. That is 5 days from today. You can't be serious." His voice went tight again, the softness gone as quickly as it had appeared. 32 pages, and you're hanging everything on one clause. Dad, I have run that company for 6 years. I have grown it. You have managed it, I said. On my behalf, under my authority. That is what a management agreement is, Sutton. It is not ownership. It has never been ownership. And you would have known that if you had read what you signed. I heard him push something, a chair, a book, something that scraped against a hard surface. The physical frustration of a man whose body needed to express what his voice was trying to hold back. This is not over, he said, and his voice had gone cold. Now the cold of someone who has decided that since asking didn't work, they will try something else entirely. I have 6 years of work in that company. I have relationships. I have contracts. You cannot just take it back like I'm some kind of employee you're letting go. Call your lawyer, I said again. Have him read the agreement, all 32 pages this time. I will. The words came out clipped sharp, each one a small door being slammed. And Dad... He stopped. What? I asked. Another pause. I could hear him deciding something, weighing something. The way you can feel the quality of silence change when someone is choosing between two different versions of what to say next. Nothing, he said finally. Never mind. He hung up. I set the phone down and looked at the notepad in front of me. I had not written anything on it. The page was completely blank, which felt in that moment like an accurate description of where my son and I had arrived. I was not angry at him. I want to be precise about that, because I think anger would have been easier. Anger is clean. Anger has edges you can hold on to. What I felt when I set that phone down was grief, the specific suffocating grief of a man who has just confirmed something he had been hoping against. Everything the evidence suggested was not true. Sutton knew about those transfers. He had written the email. He had told Brielle to get it done. And when I had walked out of that dinner table on Christmas Eve, his first response had not been to follow me. It had been to laugh. I closed the notepad, closed the laptop, and stood up from the desk. My knees ached the way they always did in cold weather. An old man's complaint, the kind of thing you learn to move through rather than wait for. I had 5 days until the management agreement expired. What I had not told Sutton on that call, what I was not ready to tell him yet, was that the accounts and the contract were only 2 of the things that no longer belonged to him. The third one had an address, the address of the house he called home. I want to tell you something about the house on Meadow Ridge Drive. I built it in 1991. Not with my own hands. I was running 3 job sites that year and had no business picking up a hammer. But I designed every room of it, with Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table of our old place in Coscob, with graph paper and too much coffee, arguing cheerfully about ceiling heights and whether the study needed a fireplace. Eleanor won the fireplace argument. She won most of the arguments in our marriage, and the house was better for it. I raised Sutton in that house, taught him to ride a bike in the driveway, watched him leave for college from the front steps, buried Eleanor from the living room window the year she passed because she had asked to have her service at home in the place she loved most. And on the morning of December 27th, 2025 at 9:41 a.m., a courier from Connie's Manhattan office drove 45 minutes through Connecticut winter traffic and rang the doorbell of that house. I know the exact time because Connie texted me the moment delivery was confirmed. I was sitting in my hotel room with my 4th coffee of the morning, a habit I had developed over 68 years that my doctor disapproved of, and my body had stopped negotiating with when my phone buzzed on the desk. Delivered, 9:41 a.m., signed for by B. Wren. I set the phone down and looked out at the harbor. Brielle had been awake then, probably at the kitchen island with her French press and her tablet, doing whatever she did in the mornings to maintain the performance of a woman who had everything under control. She would have signed for the envelope with the automatic efficiency of someone who received deliveries often. She probably didn't even look at the return address until she was back inside. I found out later from Sutton, who told me the story in pieces over several weeks. The way a man tells a story, he is still ashamed of exactly what happened next. Brielle opened the envelope at the kitchen counter. Inside was a formal legal notice on Connie's firm letterhead, Voss and Associates Attorneys at Law, citing her authority as administrative trustee of the Wren Family Trust. The notice stated clearly that the property at Meadow Ridge Drive, Greenwich, Connecticut, was an asset of the Wren Family Trust and had been so since its establishment 7 years prior. It further stated that due to documented breach of fiduciary duty by the current occupants, I want you to understand what that phrase means. It means they had violated the legal obligations they owed to the trust by diverting its assets. The trustees were exercising their right to reclaim possession of the property. Sutton and Brielle had 30 days to vacate. 30 days. That was the legally required notice period under Connecticut property law, and Connie had given them exactly that, not a day more. Sutton told me that Brielle read the letter 3 times. Then she set it on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down, when your hands have started shaking and you don't want anyone to see, and she called him. "Get home," she said. "Right now, get home." Sutton had been at a coffee shop 2 miles away. Apparently he had taken to leaving the house early in the mornings since the accounts were locked, the way men pace when they don't know what to do with themselves. He told me her voice on that call was something he had never heard from her before. Not angry, not sharp. Something underneath those things. Something that sounded for the first time in the years he had known her like fear. He drove home, read the letter himself. His hands were trembling by the second paragraph. "She's taking the house," he said to Brielle. He's taking the house. "It was never our house," Brielle said, and her voice had gone cold in the way it does when she is recalibrating, moving from panic to strategy. "It was always his. We just didn't know it." "You didn't know it," Sutton said. And something in the way he said it, flat quiet, the way a stone drops into still water, told Brielle that the conversation had just shifted into territory she hadn't mapped. He called his personal attorney that afternoon, a man named Whitfield, who had handled Sutton's individual legal matters for years, not a trust attorney, not a corporate litigator, just a general practice lawyer in Stamford, who had helped Sutton with a contract dispute 2 years back. Whitfield took the call, listened to the summary, and said words that Sutton later described to me as the most unpleasant 4 minutes of his adult life. "Sutton," Whitfield said, "I need you to find the original documents your father gave you 6 years ago. Every page. And I need you to bring them to my office tomorrow morning." "I already read the management agreement," Sutton said. "I know about the termination clause. It's not just the termination clause I'm concerned about," Whitfield said slowly. "If this property has always been a trust asset, and you've been living in it without a formal lease agreement under the trust, that's one issue. But if there are other trust assets that have been transferred out during your management period, that is a substantially more serious issue." Sutton told me the line went very quiet after that. "How serious?" he asked. Whitfield paused. "Bring me the documents," he said. "Everything. We'll talk in the morning." That evening, Sutton went through the filing cabinet in the study, Eleanor's old study, the one with the fireplace she had won the argument about, and pulled out every piece of paper he had ever signed with my name on it. It took him 4 hours. He called me when he was done. His voice, when it came through, sounded hollowed out, like something had been removed from the center of it. "Dad," he said, "I need to ask you something." "Ask," I said. "The transfers. The Stamford building. The Westport office. The Norwalk warehouse." He stopped. I could hear him swallow. "Did you know?" "Yes," I said. "I knew." The sound he made then was not a word. It was something shorter and more honest than a word, a breath that had started out as something else and didn't make it. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay." He hung up, and in that single word, "okay," I heard more than he intended to say. I heard a man who had just understood that the ground had been gone beneath him for a very long time and was only now feeling the falling. I drove to Manhattan on the morning of December 28th in a car I had not driven in 6 years. Not the old Ford. The Ford had served its purpose, had done its job of making me look like a man who had nothing left. What I drove that morning was a dark gray sedan that Connie had arranged from a car service she used for client transport, clean and unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that moves through traffic without asking to be noticed. I had not told Sutton I was leaving Connecticut. I had not told anyone except Connie, who had texted me the night before, "Come up tomorrow. There's something you need to see in person." Those 7 words from a woman who communicated primarily in documents and facts told me everything I needed to know about what was waiting. The drive up I-95 took just under 2 hours in holiday week traffic. I drank a gas station coffee that tasted like ambition and disappointment, listened to a radio station playing the kind of music that had been popular when Sutton was in middle school, and let myself think. Not about strategy. Not about the next move or the timeline, or what Connie's file was going to show me. I had spent enough years thinking about those things. What I let myself think about somewhere on the stretch of highway between Greenwich and Stamford was Eleanor. She would have hated this. Not the trust, not the plan. Eleanor had understood better than anyone what people showed you when they thought you had nothing. She would have hated that it had come to this. That the boy she had raised, the boy she had read to sleep every night and driven to soccer practice and cried at his graduation, had chosen to stand at a dinner table and do nothing while his wife served his father dog food. She would have been heartbroken. I let myself feel that for exactly the length of time it took to pass through Stamford. Then I put it away because grief and clarity cannot occupy the same space, and I needed to be clear. Connie's office was on the 31st floor of a building on Lexington Avenue that smelled like expensive carpet and recirculated air. I had been there dozens of times over 25 years, for contract signings, for the trust documents, for the quiet strategy sessions that had shaped every major decision of my professional life. The receptionist, a composed young man named Marcus, who had been at that desk for 3 years and greeted everyone with the same pleasant neutrality, looked up when I walked in. "Mr. Wren," he said, "Ms. Voss is expecting you. Go right in." Connie was standing when I entered, which she never did. She stood at the window with her arms crossed and her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. Her thinking posture, the one she used when something had arrived that required more than sitting down to process. She turned when she heard the door. "Elias," she said, "thank you for coming up." "Your text said in person," I said, setting my coat over the back of the chair. When Connie Voss says in person, a man comes in person. She almost smiled at that, a small, tight expression that lasted about a second before the weight of whatever she was carrying pressed it back down. "Sit down," she said. She opened a folder on her desk and turned it to face me. Inside were bank documents, loan origination records, property, appraisals, a signature page I recognized immediately. Brielle's signature. Sutton's address listed as the borrower's residence. $3.2 million, Connie said. Borrowed from Meridian Private Bank in Stamford 14 months ago, before the formal transfer filings for Westport and Norwalk had been recorded with the county. The loan was originated while both properties still appeared on public record under Sutton's management authority. The transfers were completed afterward, which is precisely why the bank had no initial reason to question the collateral. I leaned forward and looked at the appraisal documents. Both properties had been assessed at their full market value. Combined, they had been valued at just over $5 million more than sufficient collateral for a $3.2 million loan, which is precisely why the bank had approved it without unusual scrutiny. "Those properties are trust assets," I said. "They are," Connie said. "They have always been trust assets. They cannot legally be pledged as collateral by anyone other than the controlling trustee, which is you." She paused. Brielle listed them as assets owned by Sutton Wren individually. She signed the mortgage application personally as a co-borrower. "I want to make sure you understand the full weight of what that means." under federal law, specifically Title 18 of the United States Code. Section 1014, making a false statement to a financial institution to obtain a loan, is a federal crime. It carries up to 30 years in prison. Brielle had told a bank that she and Sutton owned properties that had never at any point belonged to them. She had signed those statements under penalty of perjury. "When did the bank find out?" I asked. "I sent them a certified copy of the trust documents on December 26th, Connie said. "The day after you gave me the green light. It's standard procedure when trust assets have been improperly encumbered. The trustee notifies the lending institution." She folded her hands on the desk. "They called me back within 4 hours. And the loan has been called," she said. "The bank issued a demand notice yesterday morning. The full $3.2 million is due within 30 days. I sat back in the chair. $3.2 million. Due within 30 days. I thought about what Harlow had told me about Brielle's personal accounts, the ones separate from the company funds she had been spending like water for the past 6 years. Last he had checked, she had somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 in her own name. "She doesn't have it," I said. "No," Connie said. "She does not. And the money she borrowed, what did she do with it?" Connie turned to the next page of the folder. 14 months of expenditure records. Renovations to the Greenwich house, $240,000. A condominium purchase in Miami in Brielle's name, only $850,000. Various personal expenditures. She looked up. The Miami condominium has already been flagged by the bank as a potentially recoverable asset. I looked at the numbers on the page. I thought about the woman who had set a dog food can in front of me on Christmas Eve and smiled at the room. She had borrowed $3.2 million against a house she didn't own, spent most of it on herself, and was now 30 days away from a demand she could not meet, living in a property she was about to be evicted from, with company accounts she could no longer access. The phone on Connie's desk rang. She glanced at the display, and something shifted in her expression, a tightening around the eyes, a particular quality of alertness that I had learned over 25 years meant the situation had just expanded. "It's Raymond Ashford," she said. "He's one of your 2 major clients." She looked at me. I nodded. "This is the second time he's called this morning," she said. She picked up the phone, and across town, across the river, across all the distance that money and silence and 6 years of patience had built between what was and what was coming, the next part of this story walked through the door. Connie picked up the phone the way she did everything, without hesitation, without performance, with the particular economy of motion that comes from decades of doing things that matter. She pressed the speaker button and set the handset in the cradle between us, and the voice of Raymond Ashford filled the conference room like weather coming in off the water. Raymond was 70 years old, a man who had started Ashford Industrial Supply with a single delivery truck and a handshake agreement with a hardware distributor in Bridgeport, back when I was still in my 30s. We had built our businesses in parallel, running into each other at chamber events and contract negotiations, until somewhere along the way we had stopped being acquaintances and started being the kind of men who called each other by first name, and meant it. "Connie," he said, and then, because he had apparently already been told I was there, "Elias." "Raymond," I said, "thank you for calling back. I've been staring at this documentation for 2 hours," he said, and his voice had a quality I had never heard from him before, not angry, not loud, but compressed, like a man who has been holding something very tightly for a long time and has decided to put it down carefully rather than throw it. 2 hours, Elias. I keep looking at these 2 columns of numbers and I keep thinking I'm reading it wrong. Tell me I'm reading it wrong." Connie leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Ashford, you're reading it correctly. What you have in front of you are 2 sets of invoices, one issued by Wren and Legacy Capital Group for services rendered to Ashford Industrial, and one issued by an LLC called Meridian Bridge Holdings for the same services on the same dates in the same amounts. Your accounts were billed twice for every transaction over a 14-month period. I want to explain what that means in plain terms because it matters. Meridian Bridge. Holdings, the LLC that Brielle had quietly set up through her brother Douglas Fenn, had been presenting itself to Raymond's accounts payable department under a slightly different trade name, using documentation that mimicked Wren and Legacy's formatting closely enough that a busy accounting clerk processing dozens of invoices a month would not immediately flag the duplication. It was not a crude scheme. It was patient, detailed, and designed to avoid notice for as long as possible. It had worked for 14 months, $280,000, Raymond said, and his voice cracked slightly on the number not with grief, but with the particular rawness of a man whose trust has just been calculated into a dollar figure. That is what my company paid twice. $283,400, Connie said precisely. We have documentation for every transaction. A long breath on the other end of the line. Then, Elias, I need to ask you directly. Did you know about this while it was happening? My chest tightened. This was the question I had been dreading more than any other in this entire ordeal, not from a courtroom, not from a lawyer, but from Raymond Ashford, who had trusted me with his freight contracts, because I had never once given him a reason not to. No, I said. I did not know while it was happening. I found out 4 days ago. You are the first call I asked Connie to make. A pause. Then Raymond said something I did not expect. I believe you, he said. Simple. Flat. No qualifier, no condition. Just I believe you. My eyes stung unexpectedly. The kind of sting that catches you off guard when you have been holding yourself together for days and someone says something kind without warning. I blinked it back. Raymond, I started. Don't, he said not unkindly. Don't apologize yet. Let's fix it first. What do you need from me? A sworn statement of the duplicate transactions and your payment records for the past 2 years, Connie said. We're filing a civil fraud complaint and potentially supporting a criminal referral. Your documentation strengthens both. You'll have everything by end of day tomorrow, Raymond said, and the compression in his voice had shifted into something harder and more purposeful than the sound of a man who has converted his hurt into momentum. And Elias, whoever did this to you, they picked the wrong family to steal from. He ended the call. Connie and I looked at each other across the conference table. The afternoon light through the windows had gone flat and gray, the particular light of a December afternoon in Manhattan that has no warmth left in it. 40 minutes later, Patricia Keene called. Patricia was 53, ran a commercial real estate investment fund out of Westport, and had come to Wren and Legacy 6 years ago through a referral from Raymond himself. Where Raymond was warm, Patricia was precise. Where Raymond trusted instincts, Patricia trusted documentation. She was, in my experience, one of the sharpest people I had ever sat across a table from, and I say that without qualification. She did not waste time. I flagged irregularities in my accounts 2 months ago, she said before Connie had finished introducing the call. I had my internal audit team pull the records. I suspected double billing, but I didn't have enough to act on. What you sent me this morning filled in every gap. How much? I asked. $511,000 over 14 months, Patricia said, and her voice was entirely level, not because she wasn't furious, but because Patricia Keene was the kind of person who expressed fury through precision rather than volume. I'm filing my own complaint independently of yours. My attorneys are already drafting. That is entirely your right, Connie said. It's not a right, Patricia said. It's a guarantee. She paused. Elias, I want you to know something. When I got your documentation this morning, my first reaction was not anger at you. My first reaction was that someone had worked very hard for a very long time to use your name to steal from me. And that tells me everything I need to know about where the blame sits. I exhaled slowly. Thank you, Patricia. Don't thank me, she said briskly. Thank me when this is finished. I'll be in touch with Connie's office. She ended the call. The conference room went quiet, the particular quiet of a space where significant things have just been said and the air hasn't settled yet. Connie closed the folder in front of her and pressed her fingertips together, her thinking posture, the one that meant she was assembling something. 2 independent complainants, she said. Nearly $800,000 in documented duplicate billing. Raymond's records and Patricia's independent filing. That's not a civil dispute anymore, Elias. That's a pattern. It was always a pattern, I said. Now it's provable. She looked at me steadily. There's one more thing. I received a call from my paralegal while Raymond was on the line. She paused, choosing her next words with the care she gave to everything. Brielle hired an attorney this morning, and she is not pursuing negotiation. Something in my stomach went cold. What is she pursuing? Connie's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened in a way that told me whatever came next was going to require everything I had left. She filed this afternoon, Connie said. She is claiming you are mentally incapacitated, that you lack the cognitive ability to manage the trust, that every decision you have made this week should be invalidated by the court. The words landed one at a time like stones dropped into water. Then slowly I felt something move through my chest that surprised me completely. It was not fear, it was almost relief. Of all the moves Brielle could have made, that one was the one I had spent the most time preparing for. Let me explain what a conservatorship petition actually is, because I want you to understand why she chose it, and why it was ultimately the most dangerous card in her hand, and also the one she was least equipped to play. Under Connecticut law, a person can petition the probate court to appoint a conservator of the estate for an adult if they can demonstrate that the adult lacks sufficient cognitive capacity to manage their own financial affairs. This is distinct from guardianship, which applies to minors or adults with intellectual disabilities. What Brielle was filing was a conservatorship petition, the legal mechanism by which a court can strip a living adult of authority over their own money, their own contracts, their own decisions. If the court granted that petition, the appointed conservator would gain legal authority over my financial and personal decisions. Every contract I had signed, every instruction I had issued, every legal action I had taken could be reviewed and potentially unwound. She filed this afternoon, Connie said. Conservatorship petition, Fairfield County Probate Court. I know, I said. Connie looked at me. You don't seem surprised. I'm not, I said. Go to the storage cabinet, second shelf, blue box. Connie stood, walked to the floor-to-ceiling cabinet along the far wall of the conference room, and found it exactly where I said it would be, a standard archival box, royal blue, sealed with a strip of brown packing tape, and labeled in my handwriting, EW Competency Documentation, prepared April 2025. She carried it back to the table and set it down. She looked at me with an expression I had seen perhaps twice in 25 years, genuine surprise, the kind that she was too professional to fully show, but too human to completely hide. Elias, she said slowly, how long have you had this? 8 months, I said. Open it. She broke the seal and lifted the lid. Inside, organized in labeled manila folders, was everything. The first folder contained results from 3 independent neuropsychological evaluations. The kind of comprehensive cognitive assessment that takes 4 to 6 hours and measures memory processing speed, executive function, verbal reasoning, and spatial orientation. I had undergone the first one in April at Yale New Haven Hospital under a physician I had never met before, and had specifically chosen because she had no professional connection to anyone in my life. The second in June at Brigham and Women's in Boston. The third in September at Columbia University Medical Center in New York. All 3 assessments returned the same conclusion: cognitive function entirely within normal parameters for a healthy adult male of 68 years. No evidence of dementia, cognitive decline, or impaired decision-making capacity. Connie read the first assessment summary with the focus of someone speed-reading a legal brief. Her jaw tightened incrementally as she moved from page to page, The dates, she said. April, June, September, I said. All 2025. All before any of this began. You went to 3 different hospitals in 3 different cities, she said. And there was something in her voice that was not quite admiration, but was adjacent to it. Under what name? My own, I said. I had no reason to hide. I just had every reason to document. The second folder contained minutes from the most recent Wren Family Trust Advisory meeting, held in November 2025, 7 weeks before Christmas. I had chaired a 4-hour session with the Trust's 2 outside financial advisors, walking through a full portfolio review, proposed allocation adjustments for the coming year, and a risk assessment of 3 potential acquisition targets. The meeting had been recorded with the consent of all parties, transcribed, notarized, and filed. Connie held up the transcript. "This is 62 pages, she said. "It was a thorough meeting," I said. The third folder was a personal financial journal, 12 months of annotated transaction records, investment decisions, and written rationales for every significant financial action I had taken in 2025. Not because I was required to keep one, because I had known that if Brielle ever tried this, the most powerful thing I could produce would be the documented thought process of a man who had been thinking clearly, consistently, and deliberately for the entire year before she made her move. Connie set the folder down and pressed both hands flat on the table the way she did when she was steadying herself before saying something that required precision. "Elias," she said, and her voice had a warmth in it that she did not often allow herself. "This is the most comprehensive competency defense file I have seen in 30 years of practice." My throat tightened unexpectedly, not with emotion about the file, with the memory of what it had cost to build it. All those mornings in waiting rooms, all those hours of cognitive testing, answering questions about patterns and sequences, and word recall, sitting across from doctors who were kind and professional and had no idea they were helping an old man prepare for a fight his daughter-in-law didn't know was coming. "Will it be enough?" I asked. Connie looked at me directly. "I am filing our response first thing tomorrow morning," she said. "I am going to attach every page of this box as exhibits, and then I am going to call her attorney and read him slowly and clearly every date on every document." She picked up her pen and opened a legal pad. "Brielle chose to attack your mind," Connie said, writing the date at the top of the page, "because it was the only thing she thought she could reach." She looked up. She was wrong. I nodded. The tightness in my throat had eased into something quieter, not triumph, not satisfaction, but the deep, still feeling of a man who prepared for the worst and is now watching that preparation hold. "File it first thing," as I said. "And Connie," I paused, "make sure they see the November meeting transcript. All 62 pages." Connie allowed herself something close to a genuine smile. "Oh, I intend to," she said. "Every single one." She began to write, and outside the Manhattan windows, the December dark had settled fully over the city, and somewhere across the state line, in a house on Meadow Ridge Drive that no longer belonged to her, Brielle Wren was about to discover that the man she had called mentally incapacitated had been documenting his own clarity in triplicate for 8 months. The guardianship petition would be dismissed in 72 hours, but there was something else coming, something I had not yet told Connie about. A phone call that Sutton had made 3 days ago when he was frightened and furious, and not thinking about the fact that the man on the other end of the line had every legal right in the state of Connecticut to press record. 2 days before the new year, I sat across from Connie in the same conference room, where Raymond Ashford's voice had filled the air like an oncoming storm, and I told her about the phone call I had been carrying alone since the night of December 27th. I had not told her about it immediately, not because I was uncertain about what to do with it. I had known the moment I heard the words come through the receiver exactly what they were and exactly what they meant. I had waited because I needed to understand it fully before I handed it to someone else. Some things you have to hold by yourself for a while before they become evidence. Connie set her coffee down and looked at me with the focused attention she reserved for information that was about to change the shape of everything. "Tell me," she said. I leaned back in my chair and let myself go back to the evening of December 27th, the night after Sutton had read the trust documents for the first time, the night after Whitfield had told him to bring everything to his office in the morning. "He called me at 9:47 that night," I said. "I was in my hotel room in Greenwich. I had been recording every incoming call from Sutton and Brielle since the morning of December 26th. Connie's eyes sharpened. "On what device?" "My phone. I use a call recording application that operates automatically the moment a call connects. I enabled it the morning Harlow locked the accounts." I paused. "Connecticut's recording law is complicated," I said. "For in-person conversations, one party is enough. For phone calls, it's murkier. But Connie had advised me months ago that a recording made in good faith by a party to the conversation, even if legally contested, remains discoverable and admissible as civil evidence in trust litigation. I had kept it. I had documented when and why I made it. That was enough." She nodded once slowly, the nod of a lawyer who is simultaneously confirming a legal fact and recalibrating the entire landscape of a case. "Go on," she said. He started the way he had been starting all his calls that week, urgent, pressured, convinced that if he pushed hard enough, I would fold. He said I was destroying the family. He said I owed him. He said 6 years of his life had gone into running that company, and he deserved to be compensated. I stopped, took a breath, and then he said something else. The conference room felt very still. Outside the 31st floor windows, Manhattan was doing what Manhattan does in the last week of December, moving, always moving, indifferent to the private catastrophes of the people in the buildings above it. He said, I continued, my voice steady, though my chest ached with something I could not name cleanly. "Dad, I will have you committed if I have to. I will put you in a facility, and I will run that company myself the way it was always supposed to be. Don't make me do this." Connie did not move. He said it slowly, I told her. Clearly, like he had thought about it beforehand and decided that if he said it carefully enough, it would land the way he needed it to land. I paused. It landed, just not the way he intended. The words had hit me like a physical thing, not because I was afraid of a facility, not because I believed for 1 second that any court would grant him what he was describing, but because of what it revealed about the man my son had become. The boy I had taught to ride a bike in the driveway of that house. The boy who used to fall asleep against my arm on long drives back from his grandmother's place in Vermont. That boy had grown into a man who, when backed into a corner, would threaten to have his father declared incompetent and locked away. I had sat on the edge of that hotel bed after the call ended, phone in my hand, the recording safely preserved in the application's history, and I had cried. I want to be honest about that. Not loudly, not for long, just the quiet, dry-eyed kind of crying that comes when something breaks inside you that you had been hoping against everything would hold. The full call is 4 minutes and 19 seconds, I said to Connie. The threat comes at the 2-minute 40 mark. Clear audio, no ambient interference. Connie pressed her fingers together, the way she did when she was building something in her mind, assembling the legal architecture of a situation, piece by piece, fitting each element into its proper load-bearing position. "Elias," she said, and her voice had gone very precise. "What Sutton described threatening to have a competent adult institutionalized in order to gain control of their assets, that is not a civil matter. Under Connecticut law and federal statute, that is elder financial abuse. Under Title 18, Section 875B, the threat itself, made with intent to extort, transmitted across a telephone line, can constitute federal criminal extortion. I had known this. I had looked it up on my phone in that hotel room at 10:15 at night, sitting alone with the recording and the knowledge of what my son had said to me because I needed to understand what I was holding before I decided what to do with it. The question, I said, is what I do with it. Connie looked at me steadily. The question, she said, is what you want. Because once this recording enters the legal record, once I submit it as evidence, there is no retrieving it. It becomes part of the public proceeding. It becomes part of what defines Sutton Wren legally and publicly for a very long time. My jaw tightened. My hands folded on the table, pressed together until I could feel the pressure in my knuckles. He's my son, I said. I know he is, Connie said. And for the first time that week, her voice carried something that was not legal strategy, but simple human acknowledgement. And you are the only person who can decide how far this goes. I looked at the table between us. Thought about Sutton at 9 years old, standing at the top of the driveway on a Saturday morning, learning to balance a two-wheeler for the first time, terrified and furious and determined all at once. Then I thought about 2 minutes and 40 seconds into a phone call on the night of December 27th. He needs to be stopped, I said finally. My voice came out rough, scraped thin, the way a voice sounds when it's carrying more than words. Not punished, stopped. There's a difference. Connie nodded, and her eyes told me she understood exactly what I meant by that. Then we use it, she said. Strategically, not as a weapon, as a boundary. I nodded. There's one more thing, Connie said, pulling a notepad toward her. The conservatorship petition was dismissed this morning, 71 hours after filing. She looked up. Her attorney called mine at 8:45. He sounded tired. Something in my chest unknotted just slightly. Good, I said. Yes, Connie said. Good. Now. She uncapped her pen. Tell me about December 31st. Because in 48 hours, Sutton Wren's authority over that company expires at midnight. And when it does, he is going to need somewhere to put all of that desperation. We need to be ready for wherever he points it. The last day of 2025 arrived the way endings usually do, without announcement, without ceremony, looking almost exactly like the day before it. I drove from my Manhattan hotel to a temporary office space Connie had arranged in a building on Park Avenue South, arriving at 8 in the morning to find Harlow already there. He had driven up from Greenwich the night before, checked into a hotel 2 blocks away, and been at that desk since 7. There was a fresh carafe of coffee on the credenza and a stack of signature-ready documents organized with the kind of precision that made me quietly grateful for the 1,000th time in 15 years that Harlow Briggs existed. Good morning, sir, he said, standing when I walked in, a habit he had never broken despite my telling him repeatedly it was unnecessary. He was 51 years old, lean and composed with the particular stillness of a man who has spent a career being the calmest person in the room and has learned to be comfortable there. Good morning, Harlow, I said, setting my coat over the back of the chair. How are we looking? Everything is ready, he said, and moved to the first document in the stack, with the focused efficiency of a man who had been mentally rehearsed this moment for months. Shall we? We spent the morning going through them one by one. The first transfer of controlling authority documents, returning full operational control of Wren and Legacy Capital Group to Elias Wren as grantor and beneficiary of the Wren Family Trust. The restoration of my name as sole authorized signatory on all company accounts. The revocation of every management delegation that had been issued under the now expiring agreement. The formal notification to the company's registered agents, its insurance carriers, and its banking institutions. Each page I signed, Harlow countersigned as witness dated, and moved to the completed stack with quiet, unhurried precision. You know, I said somewhere around the 4th document, I have signed approximately 11,000 pieces of paper in my professional life. Harlow looked up from his witness signature. And how does this stack compare? I thought about it honestly. Lighter than most, I said. by a significant margin. Something moved across Harlow's face, not quite a smile, but the facial equivalent of a nod that meant I understand exactly what you mean. By 11:30, everything was signed, countersigned, notarized, and organized into the 6 labeled folders that Harlow had prepared. He stacked them with the care of someone who understood that each one represented years of work and would outlast the room we were sitting in. "Harlow," I said as he closed the last folder. He looked up. "Thank you," I said. "Not just for today, for all of it." 14 months of weekly reports, every transaction flagged, every anomaly documented. I know what that cost you, being inside that office every day watching what was happening and holding it. Harlow's jaw moved slightly. His eyes, which were habitually steady and professionally neutral, did something they almost never did in my presence. They softened. "Mr. Wren," he said, "I have worked for a great many people in this industry. You are the only one who ever called me on a Saturday morning to ask if my daughter's school play had gone well." He straightened the folder stack with one careful adjustment. There was never any question about where my loyalty sat. My throat closed for a moment, the sudden ambushing tightness of being seen by someone who has no obligation to see you. I cleared it and nodded, because some things don't need more words than that. The afternoon passed in calls, Connie filing the court confirmations, Harlow coordinating with the banking contacts, a brief conversation with Raymond Ashford's attorney confirming the documentation timeline. By 4 o'clock, the work was done and the city outside the windows had begun its slow transformation into New Year's Eve, that particular quality of anticipation that settles over Manhattan in the late afternoon of December 31st, like a change in air pressure. I did not go anywhere to celebrate. I ordered food from the place around the corner, ate at the desk, and worked through the early evening on correspondence that had accumulated during the week. Connie called at 9 to confirm that everything was filed and that the morning of January 1st would begin with the full legal record reflecting the truth of who owned what. "Happy New Year, Elias," she said, and her voice carried something warmer than usual, the warmth of someone who had fought alongside you and watched the fight go the right way. "Happy New Year, Connie," I said. "Thank you for not going home for Christmas." She laughed, a genuine one, short and bright, the kind she didn't often allow herself during business hours. "Go get some sleep," she said. At 11:45, Harlow sent the termination notification from his laptop in his hotel room, 2 blocks away. It arrived in Sutton's inbox at 11:59 p.m. simultaneously, with a certified mail confirmation that a physical copy had been dispatched that afternoon. The notification read in the precise legal language that Connie had drafted. This communication confirms that Management Agreement Number WL-2019-001, executed December 14, 2019, between Wren Family Trust and Sutton Wren, has reached its contractual expiration date of December 31st, 2025, and has not been renewed. All management authority conferred under said agreement is hereby terminated effective January 1st, 2026 at 12 a.m. 12 words on page 9 of a 32-page document that Sutton had signed with a champagne glass in his other hand. 6 years later, those 12 words were the last thing he read in 2025. I was not watching the ball drop. I was sitting in a borrowed office on Park Avenue, Southcote, on ready to leave, when the city outside erupted in the way it always does. At midnight, horns and cheers, and the faint sound of fireworks somewhere over the river. The sound of a million people agreeing that time had changed, even though nothing had actually changed except the number. My phone lit up at 12:03, Sutton's name on the screen. I looked at it, felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the weight of everything that name still carried, and I let it go to voicemail. Whatever he had to say could wait until morning, because what I had not told Sutton, what I had not told anyone except Connie, in the careful, strategic language of a woman who understood that some information needed to arrive in the right sequence, was that the termination of his management agreement was not the last thing coming. It was not even the most difficult thing coming. The most difficult thing was the morning of January 2nd, when Sutton Wren was going to walk into his attorney's office in Stamford, and the choice he made in that room was going to define the rest of his life in ways that no management agreement and no expiration date could prepare him for. I turned off the desk lamp, picked up my coat, and walked out into the new year. Before I reveal what Sutton walked into that attorney's office carrying, and what it meant for every single person in this story, I need to know you're still here. Drop "I'm still here" in the comments. It takes 2 seconds, and it tells me this story is worth finishing together. A gentle reminder. The chapters ahead contain some fictional elements crafted to bring this story to life. It may not reflect every detail exactly as it happened. If that matters to you, feel free to step away now with no hard feelings. For everyone staying, what comes next changes everything. I found out what happened in Whitfield's office the same way I found out most things that week, not from the person who was there, but from the person who received the call afterward. Connie phoned me at 2:17 in the afternoon on January 2nd. I was back in Greenwich by then, settled into a different hotel, the Delamar again, because I had developed a particular tolerance for its particular quiet when her name appeared on my screen. "Sutton's attorney called me 20 minutes ago," she said, and her voice had that quality it got when something significant had shifted the way barometric pressure changes before weather. "He wants to discuss a cooperation framework." I sat up straighter in my chair. "Tell me." "Sutton walked into Whitfield's office this morning with a briefcase," Connie said. Inside was every email, every internal message, every document he had access to before the accounts were locked on December 26th. He told Whitfield he wanted to cooperate with the civil proceedings and, if necessary, with any criminal referral. He said, and I'm quoting Whitfield directly here, "She planned this. I followed. I need you to make that distinction clear." The room felt very still around me. I want to tell you honestly what I felt in that moment, because it was not what I expected to feel. I had imagined in the long nights of that hotel room that when Sutton finally broke from Brielle, I would feel something like relief, maybe even something like vindication. What I actually felt was a deep, hollowing sadness that started somewhere behind my sternum and spread outward like cold water. My son had just handed over his wife to save himself. And the worst part, the part that made my eyes burn and my jaw clench until my back teeth ached, was that I understood exactly why he did it, and I could not fully blame him for it. And I also could not pretend it didn't break something in me to watch. "Elias," Connie said. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "What does the cooperation cover?" "Everything," she said. "The 14 months of internal communications documenting the Meridian Bridge transfers, the exchange between Sutton and Brielle about the Norwalk timeline, financial records he accessed before lockdown, and..." She paused. "He confirmed the recording." "Which recording?" "He told Whitfield about the December 27th call. He told him you had recorded it. He said, and again I'm quoting, 'My father has a recording of me threatening him. I need you to know that before anyone else uses it.'" My chest tightened so sharply I had to breathe through it for a moment. Sutton had not known I was recording. He had figured it out, or guessed, or simply accepted it as the logical conclusion of who his father was, and he had walked into his lawyer's office and disclosed it himself before it could be used against him without warning. It was in its way the most honest thing he had done in years. That evening at 7:43, Sutton called me directly. I picked up on the second ring. "Dad." His voice was raw, scraped down to the bone, the voice of a man who had spent a day dismantling the life he thought he had built, document by document, and was now standing in the rubble of it. "I told Whitfield everything." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." His voice cracked on the second word, a genuine fracture, not a performance, the sound of a man whose composure had finally given out completely. "Dad, I am so sorry." For all of it. For Christmas. For the years before Christmas. For the email. For not. He stopped. I heard him pull in a shaking breath, the kind that comes right before tears. For not being the person you deserved. My own throat tightened so hard, it felt like something physical pressing against the inside of my neck. I know you are, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. I should have called you, he said. And now the tears were audible, not dramatic, not performative, just the wet, broken sound of a man who had held himself together for too long and could no longer manage it. When I saw what Brielle was doing with those properties, I should have called you. Instead, I told her to get it done before year-end. I told her. He made a sound that was half laugh and half grief. What kind of person does that? I closed my eyes for a moment. Thought about every Sunday afternoon call that had stopped coming. Every Christmas before this one. Every version of this conversation that I had played out in my head over 6 years of waiting. A frightened one, I said finally. A person who made the wrong choice when it was easy and is making a harder one now when it costs something. He did not say anything to that. But I heard him exhale long, unsteady, like a man releasing a weight he had been carrying in his lungs. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said, you tell the truth, every piece of it, and then we see what's left. On the morning of January 5th, 2026, Connie and I drove to Bridgeport together. The Fairfield County District Attorney's Office occupied the 4th floor of a building on Golden Hill Street that smelled like recycled air and decades of difficult decisions. The carpet was gray. The furniture was the particular shade of institutional beige that says this is a place where things are resolved, not decorated. A paralegal with a lanyard and a brisk handshake led us to a conference room and told us someone would be with us shortly. How are you feeling? Connie asked, setting her briefcase on the table. Like a man who has been building towards something for 6 years and is now sitting in a government conference room in Bridgeport in January, I said. Exactly how you'd expect. The corner of her mouth moved. That's fair. The assistant district attorney who handled the case was a woman in her early 40s named Deirdre Walsh, compact, efficient, with the kind of focused energy that suggested she had 17 other things on her calendar today, and was giving us the full attention of every one of those 17. She shook our hands, sat down, and opened a folder without ceremony. Mr. Wren, she said, I want to walk you through where we are. She laid out the charges clearly, and without embellishment, the way experienced prosecutors present information to victims factually, respectfully, without false reassurance. 7 counts against Brielle Wren. Wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343, for the double billing scheme that had directed payments from Raymond Ashford and Patricia Keene into Meridian Bridge Holdings through electronic wire transfers. Mail fraud under Section 1341 for the physical invoicing. Fraudulent transfer of trust assets under Connecticut statutes. Mortgage fraud under Section 1014 for the false statements made to Meridian Private Bank about the ownership of the collateral properties. Breach of fiduciary duty under Connecticut civil law referred to the criminal division given the scale. Elder financial abuse under Connecticut general statutes. And conspiracy because none of it had been done alone. The recording you provided, Walsh said, looking at me directly, of the December 27th call that is the strongest single piece of evidence in the file. It establishes intent, it establishes pattern, and it establishes that the individuals involved understood exactly what they were doing. What about my son? I asked. Walsh folded her hands on the table. Mr. Sutton Wren has entered into a cooperation agreement with this office. He is providing testimony and documentation. Based on the evidence available, and given that cooperation, we are not pursuing criminal charges against him at this time. She paused. That is not immunity. That is a considered decision based on his demonstrated willingness to make the record complete. I nodded. My jaw was tight, but I nodded. Bail has been set at $500,000, Walsh continued. Given that her personal accounts are under judicial review and the primary assets she would normally access are frozen, we expect she will need assistance from outside sources to post it. I thought about Brielle at the Christmas dinner table in her red dress, laughing at the room. I thought about the ceramic bowl she had used to serve dog food. I thought about the clearance sticker 30% off, which I had kept in the inside pocket of my coat every single day since December 24th. When does she find out? I asked. She'll be served this afternoon, Walsh said. At the residence, she glanced at her notes, or the former residence, I should say, given the pending eviction. Connie touched my arm just briefly, the way she did when she wanted me to feel that someone else was in the room without making it sentimental. I appreciated it more than I could say. We walked out of that building at 11:42 into a Bridgeport January morning, so cold it felt like the air itself had an opinion about everything. My breath came out in clouds. The street was mostly empty, a few cars moving slowly on the icy road, a woman walking a dog that looked as resigned to the cold as the rest of us. Elias, Connie said beside me on the sidewalk. I know, I said. Are you all right? I considered the question honestly, the way I had been trying to consider everything honestly since the night of December 24th. Not yet, I said, but I think I will be. She nodded. We walked to the car. Somewhere across Fairfield County, in a house she had 30 days left to occupy, Brielle Wren was going about her afternoon without yet knowing that a courier was already on the way. That by 3 o'clock, she would be holding a document that listed in the clean and unambiguous language of a federal indictment exactly what the previous 14 months of her life had actually been. I had not planned to feel anything when that moment came. I felt everything, not triumph, not satisfaction. Something older and heavier and more honest than either of those things, the particular sorrow of a man who had wanted more than anything to be wrong about the people he loved. I had not been wrong, and that in the end was the hardest part of being right. 3 days before I sat in that Fairfield County courtroom on the morning of January 7th, I called Sutton and told him to meet me for dinner. Not at the house. Not at any place either of us had ever been together before, because I did not want the weight of familiar walls in that conversation. I chose a restaurant called the Anchor House on Post Road in Greenwich, a quiet place with wood paneling and low lighting, and the kind of booths that give two people the privacy to say things that need saying without an audience. 7 o'clock, I told him. I'll be there first. He said okay. Just okay the way he had been saying things since January 2nd, stripped down with no performance left in him. I arrived at 6:45 and took the corner booth at the back. Ordered coffee. Watched the door. He came in at 7:03, and the first thing I noticed was that he looked older. Not in the way people age gradually year by year, but the sudden visible aging that happens to a person when something enormous has moved through them and left its mark. There were lines around his eyes I did not remember from Christmas. His shoulders, which had always carried themselves with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to being in charge, were different now, not slumped exactly, but settled the way a structure settles after a tremor. He spotted me, walked over, and slid into the booth across from me. No handshake, no greeting performance. He just sat down, put both hands around the coffee mug the server had already placed, and looked at me. Thank you for coming, I said. Thank you for calling, he said. His voice was quiet, careful, the voice of a man choosing every word because he no longer trusted himself to speak without thinking first. We ordered. Neither of us touched the menus. We both ordered the first thing the server suggested because the food was not the point, and we both understood that. How are you? I asked. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, short and humorless. I moved into a place in New Haven last week, he said. 2 bedrooms, parking lot view. The coffee maker broke on day 3. He looked down at the mug. I fixed it myself. That's about the most competent thing I've done in recent memory. Something ached in my chest at that not pity but recognition. The particular loneliness of a man rebuilding from the smallest things. "Sutton," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." He looked up, and his eyes, Eleanor's eyes, the same dark gray she had passed to him, and not to anyone else, were steady and tired and willing. "When did you know?" I asked. "About the transfers, not the email in November. Before that. When did you actually know what was happening?" His jaw tightened. His hands around the mug pressed harder, the knuckles going pale. "8 months in," he said. "Maybe 9. She told me it was restructuring, that she was moving underperforming assets into a holding structure to protect them." He stopped. His voice scraped at the edges. I told myself I believed her. I didn't believe her. I told myself the version that was easier to live inside. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. He looked at the table, then back at me. When he spoke, his voice cracked open right down the middle, raw as a fresh wound. "Because I was ashamed," he said. "Because I had let it get that far, and coming to you meant admitting that I had known and done nothing, and I—" He stopped. His eyes went bright and wet, and he blinked hard, pressing his lips together against whatever was rising in him. "I was more afraid of your disappointment than I was of what she was doing." The words landed on me like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples outward into every quiet year I had spent in that cottage, watching and waiting and wondering if I had gotten my son wrong. My eyes stung. I let them. "I owe you more than an apology," Sutton said. His voice had gone hoarse, unsteady, the voice of a man who has run out of defenses and is speaking from whatever is left underneath them. "I owe you 6 years of Sundays. I owe you every Christmas. I owe you the fact that you sat in a cottage on your own property for 6 years being treated like a burden while I said nothing." A tear broke and slid down his face, and he didn't wipe it away, just let it go, the way a person does when they've decided the pretense of composure costs more than it's worth. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I am so profoundly sorry." My throat closed entirely. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. He looked down at my hand. Then he broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely, his shoulders folding forward, his breath coming in short, shaking pulls, the tears coming freely now. The grief of years finding its way out through the only opening it had ever been given. I kept my hand on his, did not speak, let him have it. After a while he straightened, wiped his face with the back of his hand, looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and the particular stripped-bare expression of someone who has just given up the last thing they were protecting. "What happens now?" he asked. "Between us?" I thought about it honestly. I owed him honesty more than comfort. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I know this, you are still my son. That has not changed, and it will not change." I paused. "What happens between us depends on what you build from here. Not what you promise, what you build." He nodded slowly, deeply, the way a person nods when they are accepting something into themselves rather than just acknowledging it. "Then I'll build something worth showing you," he said. 3 days later, on the morning of January 10th, I sat in the 3rd row of a Fairfield County courtroom for the first time in my life. Connie was at the plaintiff's table to my left, her briefcase open, her reading glasses on her posture, the precise upright of a woman who has been in more rooms like this than most people will ever see and has learned to make them work for her. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, wood paneling, fluorescent overhead lights, the particular acoustics of a room designed to make everything sound important. Brielle was already seated at the defense table when we arrived. She was dressed in navy blue, understated, deliberate, the wardrobe choice of a woman who understood that courts respond to presentation. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was perfect. And her expression, when she turned briefly and saw me in the 3rd row, was the same expression she had worn at the Christmas dinner table. Controlled, performing, giving nothing away. But her hands folded on the table in front of her were pressed together too hard. I could see the white at her knuckles from where I sat. The preliminary hearing in the American court system is not a trial. Let me explain what it is because it matters. A preliminary hearing is the stage where the judge reviews the evidence and determines whether there is sufficient probable cause to proceed to a full trial. The defense can challenge the evidence file motions to suppress or propose alternative resolutions. It is in effect the last moment before the full weight of the process becomes unavoidable. Brielle's attorney, a man named Gerald Foss, silver-haired expensive suit, the practiced ease of someone who charged by the quarter hour, and made sure you felt it stood up, and proposed a motion to dismiss on the grounds of insufficient evidence of criminal intent. Connie stood up and said 3 words, "We have recordings." The judge, a woman named Patricia Owens, who had the brisk, no-excess manner of someone who had heard every argument in every register and was no longer impressed by any of them, looked at Foss over her glasses. Counsel, proceed. Connie played the first recording. Brielle's voice, clear and unhurried, instructing Douglas Fenn on the exact mechanics of the third property transfer, the Norwalk warehouse, the one Sutton had told her to complete before year-end. Every detail, every number, every deliberate step in a scheme that had taken 14 months to build. The room was very still. Then Connie played the second recording, the December 27th call. Sutton's voice, rough and frightened, threatening to have me committed and installed in a facility. I watched Brielle's shoulders as it played. They did not move, but her jaw shifted, a small, almost invisible tightening, and I knew she was hearing for the first time that Sutton had not just cooperated with the prosecution. He had given them everything. Her head turned just slightly toward the back of the room where Sutton sat in the gallery with his own attorney beside him. The look she gave him lasted less than 2 seconds. It was the most honest expression I had ever seen on her face. Not anger, not betrayal. Something colder and more absolute, the look of a person who has just understood completely and finally that they are alone. Sutton held her gaze without flinching. His jaw was set. His eyes were dry. Whatever he had cried out of himself 3 nights ago in the Anchor House, it had left something harder in its place, not cold, but resolved. The resolution of a man who has made his choice and is prepared to live inside it. Judge Owens denied the motion to dismiss without deliberating. She reviewed the exhibits Connie had submitted, the billing comparisons, the transfer documents, the bank records, the cooperation statement from Sutton. She asked Foss 3 questions, each one more pointed than the last, and by the third, Foss had stopped arguing and started calculating. "Your Honor," he said, "the defense would like to request a continuance to explore the possibility of a negotiated resolution." Translation: Brielle wanted to make a deal. Judge Owens looked at him with the expression of a woman who had translated that particular sentence many times. "You have 14 days, she said. "Don't waste them." She closed the session. I stood up. Connie came over and touched my arm lightly, her signal that things had gone the right way without requiring a speech about it. As they led Brielle out through the side door, she looked at me one final time. Across the courtroom, across everything that had happened between December 24th and this January morning, she looked at me. I looked back. I did not smile. I did not look away. I simply let her see that the man she had called the shame of the family was standing upright in the 3rd row of a Fairfield County courtroom, and that no one in that room had any doubt about who that man was. The side door closed behind her. Connie fell into step beside me as we walked out. 14 days, she said quietly. "I know," I said. "She'll take a deal." "I know that too," I said. We walked out into the January cold, and somewhere in the building behind us, the next chapter of Brielle Wren's life was already being written in the careful, precise, unambiguous language of a plea negotiation that she had run out of options to avoid. The last week of January in 2026 arrived with a cold that had no patience for sentiment. I remember standing on the steps of Fairfield County Courthouse at 8:40 in the morning. my coat pulled tight, against a wind that cut straight through the wool, watching my breath dissolve into the gray Connecticut sky. Connie Voss was already at the bottom of the steps, her leather folder pressed against her chest, her eyes sharp and alert, the way they always were on mornings that mattered. "Gerald Foss called me at 6, she said the moment I reached her. "Brielle wants to deal." My chest tightened, not with relief, but with something heavier that had no clean name. "What kind of deal?" "4 counts." Connie's voice was clipped and precise. "Wire fraud mail, fraud elder financial abuse, fraudulent transfer." She drops the other 3 in exchange for a structured sentence. Gerald confirmed she will allocute admit everything on the record in open court. I exhaled slowly, watching my breath vanish into the January air. "And Foss is comfortable with that." Connie let out a short, humorless laugh. "Gerald Foss is a realist. He's heard those recordings. He's read every bank document. He knows exactly what a jury does with evidence like that." She tilted her head toward the courthouse doors. "Shall we?" We walked inside together, our footsteps echoing across the marble lobby. The courtroom on the second floor was quieter than I expected for a Monday morning. Gerald Foss sat beside Brielle at the defense table, his posture rigid, his jaw set. Brielle wore a navy blazer I had never seen before, something purchased in a hurry, I suspected an attempt to project composure she no longer had access to. But her hands on the table were trembling, the knuckles pale against the dark wood, and every few seconds she pressed them flat, as if she could will the shaking to stop. Ada Deirdre Walsh stood at the prosecution table, her expression measured and professional. She gave me a brief nod as I settled into the gallery. Judge Patricia Owens entered. Everyone rose. "Be seated." The judge opened her folder, studied the documents for a long moment, then lifted her gaze to the defense table. "Ms. Wren, I understand you wish to enter a plea this morning. Is that correct?" Brielle's shoulders rose and fell on a shaky breath. "Yes, Your Honor. You have reviewed the plea agreement with your counsel and understand the nature of each charge." "Yes, Your Honor." "Ms. Walsh, you may proceed." Deirdre Walsh rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the government and the defendant have reached the following agreement. The defendant will enter a plea of guilty to 4 counts. Wire fraud, in violation of 18 U.S.C., Section 1343 mail fraud, under Section 1341 elder financial abuse under Connecticut. General Statutes. Section 5, 3A-386, and fraudulent transfer. Counts 5 through 7 will be dismissed. The government recommends a sentence of 36 months in a federal facility, full restitution of all identified losses, and a permanent bar from serving as a fiduciary or corporate officer. Those words landed in the courtroom like stones dropped into still water. 36 months. I gripped the armrest, my knuckles going tight, and stared at the back of Brielle's head. Judge Owens looked directly at her. "Ms. Wren, do you understand that by entering this plea, you waive your right to trial, your right to confront witnesses, and your right against self-incrimination?" "I understand." Her voice cracked on the second word. "And how do you plead?" A pause. 1 heartbeat. 2, 3. "Guilty." The word came out broken, barely above a whisper, and yet it filled every corner of that courtroom completely. I felt my throat close. Not with victory, with grief. There is no joy in watching someone destroy themselves in front of a federal judge. My hands gripped that armrest until my palms ached, and I kept my eyes steady because looking away felt like a dishonesty I could not afford. Connie leaned close. "Sentencing in 30 days, she murmured. "Standard timeline." The sentencing hearing came on an overcast morning in the first week of February, the sky the color of old pewter, the kind of day that feels like it was designed for serious things. I sat in the same seat in the gallery, Connie to my left, Harlow Briggs to my right. Harlow had driven down from Greenwich without being asked. When I saw him waiting outside the courthouse that morning, his overcoat buttoned to the collar, and his expression steady as bedrock. Something behind my eyes burned hot. "You didn't have to make the drive," I told him. He looked at me with those calm, pragmatic eyes and said, "Yes, I did." Judge Owens sentenced Brielle to 36 months in a federal correctional facility, followed by 2 years of supervised release. Full restitution, $794,400, every dollar traced back to Raymond Ashford, Patricia Keene, and the trust accounts. Permanent prohibition from serving as a fiduciary or corporate officer for the remainder of her life. Gerald Foss requested leniency on the basis of no prior criminal record. Walsh countered with the recordings, Brielle's own voice, measured and deliberate, instructing a property manager to forge transfer documents. The judge was unmoved. 3 days after the sentencing, Connie called me to confirm that Sutton's consent decree had been filed jointly by the Connecticut Department of Banking and the company's civil attorneys. He had signed documents he should never have touched. He had known about the asset transfers for months and chosen silence. The decree barred him from Connecticut's finance and investment industry for 3 years and required 200 hours of ethics training. No criminal charges, his cooperation had ensured that, but the career he had built on a foundation he believed was his was finished. When Connie finished reading the terms over the phone, she asked, "How are you holding up?" My throat tightened. "I keep thinking about the boy who used to sit on the tailgate of my truck and ask me how I picked the deals worth taking." My voice dropped before I could stop it. I don't know when he stopped asking questions like that. "He got lost," Connie said quietly. "That's not the same as gone." I didn't answer, but I heard her. Later that afternoon, I drove into Manhattan for the first time as the sole undisputed head of Wren and Legacy Capital Group. The new office was clean and bright, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the kind of space my father would have called absurd and wonderful in the same breath. On the corner of my desk, Harlow had placed it without ceremony, the same brand of canned dog food Brielle had served me on Christmas Eve. The label was bent at one corner. It sat beside my coffee mug like it had always belonged there. I picked it up with both hands and turned it slowly. She had placed that can on my plate, expecting it to be the end of something. What she never understood was that the moment she did it, she handed me every reason I needed to begin. I set it back down, opened the first folder on my desk, and got to work. By the time March arrived, the light over Manhattan had changed entirely. It came through the office windows differently than it had in February, softer, slower, arriving each morning in long, pale gold ribbons that stretched across the hardwood floor before the city below had fully decided to wake up. I had been sitting at this desk for nearly 4 weeks by then, and something about that light, arriving without urgency, without agenda, felt like the first honest thing the season had offered me in a long time. I was on my second cup of coffee when Harlow knocked at the doorframe at 9:15. He had that particular look he carried when the news was good, not quite a smile, but something close to it, a loosening around the eyes that I had learned to read over 15 years of working beside the man. "Raymond Ashford is on line 1, he said. "Says he wants to speak with you directly. Not the office. You." I picked up the phone. "Raymond, Elias." His voice carried the warmth I remembered from the early years. The years before invoices started arriving twice and trust began its long, quiet erosion. "I wanted to reach you before the contracts went final. I've renewed for another 2 years, and I'm adding the warehouse portfolio to the agreement." My chest expanded with something steady and full, the kind of feeling that does not announce itself loudly, but settles in and stays. "Raymond, that means more than I can properly say to you. Don't thank me," he said, and his voice dropped half a register. "You ran a clean operation for 30 years. I should have questioned those invoices the moment the numbers looked wrong. That failure belongs partly to me, and I want you to know I understand that. It's behind us now," I told him. "What matters is what we build going forward. That's the only direction worth looking." There was a pause on the line, not uncomfortable, just full. Agreed, Raymond said. Thursday work for you to review the new terms. Thursday works perfectly. After I set the receiver down, I kept my hand resting on it for a moment longer than I needed to. 30 years. I had started Wren and Legacy Capital with a second-hand desk, a rented phone line, and a belief that was stubborn to the point of being irrational, that honest work and a word kept across decades would eventually compound into something no one could simply walk in and take. 40 years later, sitting in a Manhattan office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a client calling to expand his contract, I still believed every word of it. If anything, the last 3 months had not shaken that belief. They had hammered it harder into shape than anything else in my life ever had. Connie arrived at 10, her coat still carrying the cold of the street, her scarf not quite unwound from her neck. She poured herself coffee from the corner station, without asking the way she had done in my previous office for the better part of 2 decades, and settled into the chair across from me with the ease of someone who had earned the right to be comfortable in this room. She looked rested. For the first time since before Christmas, Constance Voss looked like a woman who had slept through the night without a legal brief open on her nightstand. Sutton called me yesterday, she said. My jaw tightened before I could stop it, the reflex moving faster than my intention. What did he want? He asked if you'd be willing to have lunch with him next month. She wrapped both hands around her mug, watching me carefully. No agenda, no lawyers present, no documents to review. She paused. Just his father. The feeling that moved through my chest at those words was layered in a way I could not easily separate part of me, the part that had been a father, before it had ever been anything else, wanted to say yes immediately, without conditions, without making him wait. Another part of me was still standing in that hotel room on Christmas night, staring at a dog food bowl on a silver tray, understanding, with a cold and sickening clarity, that my son had known everything for months and had chosen to protect his position instead of his father. That part was not ready. Pretending otherwise would have been a dishonesty I owed neither of us. Tell him I'll think about it, I said. Connie nodded slowly, her expression carrying no judgment whatsoever. That's an honest answer. It's the best one I have for him right now. He deserves the honest one more than the comfortable one. She set her mug down on the edge of my desk and leaned slightly forward, her voice dropping into something quieter and more personal than her attorney's register. For what it's worth, I have spent 28 years watching what money and power do to the people inside a family. I have seen it pull people so far apart that nothing ever bridges the distance again. She let that sit for a moment before continuing. I have also seen families find their way back to something worth having. Not always, not even often. But it does happen, Elias. I have watched it happen. I looked at the dog food can sitting on the corner of my desk. The label had started to curl slightly at the bottom edge, the cardboard softening with time and dry office air. Harlow had offered twice to have it properly framed, encased behind glass, the way you might display a company milestone or a letter of commendation. Both times I had told him to leave it exactly where it was, exactly as it was, bent label and all. It did not belong behind glass. It belonged where I could see it every morning when I sat down. She thought that bowl would finish me, I said, and my voice came out lower than I had intended, rougher at the edges. She thought 68 years old meant finished, meant I would sit there at that table and absorb it, and walk upstairs and be too embarrassed, too tired, or too broken to do anything about it by morning. She underestimated you entirely. Connie's voice was flat and certain, no softening anywhere in it. She underestimated what this company is. My throat tightened and I kept talking straight through it. My father laid the groundwork for this. I spent 40 years building on top of what he started. You do not walk away from 40 years because someone places a dog food bowl in front of you at your own Christmas table and waits to see if you cry. Connie's expression shifted, a real smile this time, the kind that moved all the way to her eyes and settled there without any effort. "No," she said. "You make a phone call at 5 in the morning and then you go to work." I laughed. A genuine chest-deep laugh that rolled up from somewhere I had not visited in months, and the sound of it surprised me completely. Surprised me with how easy it was, how much I had missed it. Connie laughed too, and for a full minute the office felt warmer than the March light filtering through the windows had any right to make it. Harlow appeared in the doorway at 11, holding his notepad with the quiet efficiency that had made him indispensable for 15 years. "Patricia Keene's office called while you were with Ms. Voss. She wants to expand the service agreement, asked specifically if you are available next Thursday to go over the new terms." The warmth in my chest settled a degree deeper, quieter, more permanent. "Book it." "Already confirmed," Harlow said simply, and disappeared back down the hallway without waiting for anything further. When the office fell quiet again, I pushed back from my desk and walked to the window. Manhattan stretched out below me, indifferent and magnificent, the way great cities always are. The way things built to outlast any single person always managed to be. Somewhere in a federal facility, Brielle was 30 days into a 36-month sentence. Somewhere across the state, Sutton was rebuilding something from the wreckage of choices that had seemed reasonable to him one at a time, until they became something he could no longer recognize as his own life. And in Greenwich, the house my company had always owned was 3 weeks into its conversion to regional office space, the renovation crew working through room by room. I turned back to my desk, picked up the dog food can one final time, and ran my thumb slowly along the bent edge of the label, feeling the place where the cardboard had given way. Christmas night. Brielle had set that bowl in front of me and smiled like the outcome had already been decided. Like the game was finished and she had simply forgotten to tell me. She had been right that it was over. She had only been wrong about who had lost. I set the can back on the corner of my desk in exactly the spot where it belonged and reached for the next folder. There was still work to do. There always would be. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of this. I tell them the same thing every time. I learned that dignity is not something another person can take from you. They can only reveal whether you ever truly had it. I learned that a company built on honesty will outlast every scheme designed to hollow it out. And I learned in the quietest part of that Christmas night, sitting alone in a hotel room with nothing but a phone, and the truth that God does not abandon the people who refuse to abandon what is right. That has always been enough for me. If I could offer you anything from this family story, it would be this: do not wait the way I waited. Do not spend 6 years watching warning signs and calling it patience. Protect what you have built. Protect the people who depend on your integrity. And if someone in your own home is slowly dismantling everything you sacrificed to create, act. Not with anger, but with clarity. My personal belief is simple greed dressed up as family loyalty is still greed. A title without ownership is still an illusion. And the truth, no matter how long you delay it, will eventually cost someone everything. This has been one old man's grandpa story, messy, painful, and more real than I ever wanted it to be. If any part of it stayed with you, I'd love to hear why. Drop a comment below, share this grandpa story with someone who needs it. And if this kind of family story speaks to you, subscribing to the channel is the kindest thing you can do to keep these grandpa stories alive. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the very end. And a gentle heads up, the stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and life lessons. If that is not what you are looking for today, no hard feelings at all. Step away and find the content that suits you best. But if you are staying, I promise I will always give you something worth your time.